Israel Startup Nation, they're probably the wild card this year. They could come last in the World Tour. They could come top 5. They could win a Tour de France with Chris Froome. They could have no one in the top 20. So very excited to see how they go. Fairly new team.
It's a miracle! Oh, yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli, Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle. Oh, the ball is close! He's given him! He's given him! Peter Siddle's got a hat-trick on his birthday!
Hello and welcome back to episode 105 of the On The Ball podcast. Today is a bit of a different one. Haven't touched on this sport in probably over 6 months, but we'll be talking about the cycling. It had a heavily impacted year last year due to COVID, as did most sports, but I think cycling was one of the most impacted. They pretty much could not race at all during any of the main COVID periods. Not that it's like slowing down really, but they started to get the races going later on in the year. Bit of a strange setup today. I've had to change where I'm going to record this about 3 times. It's an absolute scorcher today in Melbourne, and my laptop was struggling with the heat, and I've also been struggling with some lighting, so forgive me, I'm not in the greatest light, but needed the laptop to be in some sort of shade and didn't want to interrupt the rest of the family during lockdown. So today what I'm going to be doing, the UCI World Tour, or the Cycling World Tour, is starting on the 21st of February. The UAE Tour commences in Abu Dhabi. I think the first stage starts from, so that is on Saturday, if I'm not wrong, maybe Sunday. So that marks the start of the season. Normally it starts in Australia, but Australia having quite strict COVID policies really hasn't been letting any international events occur really, except for the cricket, so there was no way that was happening. Like the F1 is not happening, the Oz Open's happening, but that's a bit of a different story. So that's another thing. Apologies for the lack of content recently. I've been just watching a lot of the tennis and a few other sports, so I've kind of been taking a backseat, but I've been big on social media, so hopefully you've been enjoying that. But I'm going to be going through each team. I'm going to talk about the changes they've made to their roster, what their team's looking like for 2021. And yeah, we're just going to discuss that. I absolutely love the cycling, and I'm hoping to get into it a bit more. I've become a bit more structured this year. I've got a bit of a diary going, so hopefully I'm thinking of tonight writing down some of the big sporting events down in my diary so I don't miss them, because although they're massive, and if you're a big cycling fan, it's hard to ignore them, but things like Paris-Roubaix and stuff like that kind of just happen without you noticing, especially with its little coverage in Australia. So that's something I want to change this year. I really want to get into the classics especially. I'm usually all over the Grand Tours as they are well covered in Australia. Actually, I don't know if the Giro and World Tour are covered that well anymore, but they used to be. But the tour is always covered very well, promoted well, so you can never miss that one. But yeah, the classics especially, and a few of the week-long races I'd like to tune into a bit more this year, as I would with most other sports this season. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into it. I do love my cycling, so I'm going to start with, what normally is Agi Desert Le Mondial, but is now Agi Desert Citron. I think that's the first time this team has had a name change in 5 or so years. They are one of the stalwarts of the UCI World Tour. They've big changes. They've lost Romain Bardet to Team DSM or Sunweb. There's quite a few name changes, so just stick with me here. That's a big change. He's been this team's leader and go-to man for almost half a decade now, and I can't really think of an Agi Desert side without Romain Bardet, especially at the Tour de France. Other losses, they lost Alexis Villermoz, Alexander Geniez, and Pierre Latour, all to Total Direct Energy on the Continental Tour, I believe they are, or they might be on the World Tour, but if they are, we'll get to them. And then they've brought in Greg Van Avermaet from Triple C. That's a big in. They've also brought in Bob Jongels from DeKoning Quickstep, Lilian Calmejean from Total Direct Energy, Mickey Shah from CCC, and Ben O'Connor from NTT Pro Cycling. So some huge changes. They're usually not that big on the transfer market, as you deserve. They usually got a pretty stable roster, but this year they were one of the bigger players. Looking at their roster, in terms of a sprinter or on the flat stages, they don't really have anyone. That's probably their biggest weakness as a side this year. Mark Saru, I think they signed him maybe from Groupama FDJ. Not 100% sure on that. He is a bit of a sprinter, but he definitely won't be winning big races. So they're lacking a bit there. Also in the general classification, there's not necessarily a big team leader. Bob Yongles can compete in GC. Nons Peters and Benoit Cosnefroy can also do a bit of damage in the mountains. They are all riding the Tour de France, so I'm not sure if they'll be going for GC there or if they'll just be looking for stage wins in the second and third weeks, but we'll have to wait and see for that. But in the classics, they are very strong. This is a big change they've made in the last 2 or 3 years. They used to always be a big stage race team and didn't focus too much on the classics. But now, over the last few years, they've been building an unreal squad. Oliver Narsen's been their go-to man in the last few years, but now they've got Greg Van Avermaet, who's also very strong in the classics, one of the best in the world, and Bob Jongels and Cosnefroy can also do damage in the different terrains in the hillier classics. So on the cobbles, they've got Narsen and Van Avermaet, and then on the hillier and one-day races, they've got Jongels and Cosnefroy. So very strong classic lineup, along with a heap of help for those riders. So excited to see what they can do, and I look forward to seeing if Van Avermaet and Narsen can form one of the world's best 1-2 punches for Agi Dessert. Moving on to Astana Premier Tech. The big change here is Miguel Angel Lopez moving on to Movistar. He was their GC leader last few years after Nibali left and Aru left. It's always been Lopez for, I think, since about 2017, and he finally left. He had a pretty good Tour de France, but he's decided to pull the pin on Astana. And now they're GC contenders. They didn't really bring any big names in, not that I thought were worth mentioning. So that leaves their GC. Still very strong, though. They're a very good stage race team. They've got a lot of help in the mountains. Their GC leaders will be Jakob Fuglsang and Alexander Vlasov. I'll be brutally honest with you. I don't know too much about Alexander Vlasov, but he's very highly ranked. He had a good end to last year, which I didn't catch too much of. Jakob Fuglsang, we know a lot about him. He's been around for a long time. He'll be riding the Tour de France. Vlasov will be targeting the Giro, so it's pretty clear what their strategy is. Win the Giro with Vlasov, win the Tour de France with Fuglsang. That's obviously a big ask, so probably be settling for podiums on both. I'm sure they would be happy with that. For Fuglsang, though, this is a big year. He's had 2 really good years, kind of transitioning from just a mountains guy to a genuine GC contender. But he's getting on in age now. He's had a bit of bad luck in the last couple seasons in important times, but in big races he's had big wins. But this is the year, if he's going to compete in a Grand Tour, he's got to do it this year. He's got the team for it. He's got the form for it himself. So I'm excited to see what he could do at the Tour de France. They're very strong in GC, but that has mean they've kind of sacrificed their classics and their sprinters. They don't really have anyone of note in either of those categories to mention. That moves us on to Bora Hansgrohe. A few changes here. They've swapped out Rafael Micah to UAE Team Emirates. Don't know why I said that weirdly. And they've replaced him with just another GC man and Wilco Kelderman from Sunweb or DSM. So that's pretty much a like for like, just a GC man for a GC man. They've also brought in Nils Pollitt from Israel Startup Nation, who's a pretty talented one-day racer. And in terms of the squad, looking at their leaders, on the flat stages, they're going to be looking to Peter Sagan and Pascal Ackermann. Pascal Ackermann is one of the fastest bunch sprint races at the moment in world cycling. He's going to be going to the Tour de France, as will Peter Sagan, so that's going to be quite an interesting dynamic. You'll think the team will be working for Ackermann and Sagan will go on his own to try and win the green jersey. You think that's what will happen anyway. And Sagan's also going to the Giro, so big workload for Sagan this year, but nothing he can't do, the absolute superman that he is. So that'll be exciting to see. On the GC front, they've got Emmanuel Buchmann going to the Giro. It'll be interesting to see how he goes. He's had a few up and down performances at Grand Tours. He's always shown glimpses, and then he's had big collapses on important mountain stages. So we'll see if he can impress us basically at the Giro. And then they've got Wilco Kelderman at the Tour de France. he's another one. He's a young rider, but he's shown really impressive form in the last 2 seasons at the Vuelta and the Giro, so excited to see what he can do at the Tour de France. In the Classics, they've obviously got Peter Sagan, brilliant one-day racer, and Nils Polit, their new man from Israel Startup Nation, is pretty good in the one-day races as well. Moving on to Cofidis, no real big ins and outs for this team. Their GC man, Guillaume Martin, he obviously had a very good Tour de France last year, found himself on the podium at stages. Don't know where he actually ended up finishing, I can't remember, but will once again be riding the Tour de France. Very talented GC man. On the flats, they've got Elia Viviani, who will be going to the Giro, not the Tour de France. He had a bit of a shocker of a year last year, really, after being one of the world's best sprinters at Koenig Quick-Step in about 2017. He hasn't quite lived up to that hype since, but I'm sure he'll be back and hopefully winning races for Cofidis, who, it has to be said, they've been pretty unlucky in recent years. They obviously put a lot of investment into Nasser Bahani, and then he turned out to be a bit of a dick and never really worked out for them. And now Elia Viviani, he's trying his guts out, but he hasn't been able to get results for them. So they're doing the right things in terms of a roster, but they're just not getting the performances they need. So hopefully Viviani can win them a few stages throughout the year and at the Giro. Classics, not really anyone to mention. Koenig Quick-Step, one of the best teams in the peloton as always. Haven't really changed too much to their roster because they obviously don't really need to. Mark Cavendish has come in from Bahrain McLaren, but we're yet to know how much involvement he's going to have this season. He's had pretty big injuries in the last few years, which means we haven't seen too much of him. And when we have, he hasn't really been at full flight. Bob Youngle's left to Agi Dezert, as I mentioned before. So excited to see what the Cav can do at a high-quality team like De Koenig Quick-Step. Whether he will pose a serious threat to some of the best sprinters in the world or whether he's past it, it'll be interesting to see. But I'm a big fan of Mark Cavendish, so I'm hoping he can get back to form. He'll be one of the leaders on the flat stages along with Sam Bennett, who is arguably the best sprinter in the world right now. He'll be going to the Tour de France yet again, where he had some solid success last year. My memory of the Tour de France last year is actually crap. My memory of sporting events in general is pretty bad. I get confused between years pretty quickly. But he'll be going to the Tour de France, where he, as I mentioned before, had a great year last year. Remco Evenepoel is one of their GC men. He'll be going to the Giro. João Almeida is their other one. I think he came 4th in the Giro last year. He'll be going to the Vuelta this year. So it looks like they're going to be going for stage wins and just causing chaos at the Tour. And then they're going to be looking for GC podiums at the Giro and the Vuelta. And their Classics man, well, he's just an all-round man, really. Julian Alaphilippe, he's going to the Tour once again. He'll be looking to cause havoc in the World Champs, in the one-day races, and also at the Tour de France. So exciting to see what he can do yet again. Next up, we've got EF Education Nippo. Michael Valgren is their only really interesting signing from NTT Pro Cycling. They've lost Sep Van Mark and Michael Woods to Israel Startup Nation, and they lost Daniel Felipe Martinez to Ineos Grenadiers. So some big name outs there, but they're still a pretty good team. Don't necessarily have one gun that stands out among the rest, but they've got some good depth, good fair few leaders. They're looking at going a bit of a trident, a bit like Movistar back in the day. They tried it last year, I believe, at the Tour de France with Uran, Martinez, and who was the other one? Maybe Higuita. And this year they're going to be trying it again, but Hugh Carty will be. I actually don't know if it's Carty or Carthy, but we'll say Carthy. We'll say it how it reads. Hugh Carthy will be going to the Tour de France along with Uran and Higuita, so they'll be forming that dangerous trio. Not sure if any of them are really good enough for a podium spot on the Tour de France, but they'll all be looking for some big stage wins and maybe some just causing some havoc at the end, and maybe all aiming for top 10, but we'll see how that goes. Michael Valgren's a pretty good Classics rider as well, so he'll be their man there. Uran is also going to the Vuelta, so we'll see if he can cause some damage there. It looks like, so Tour de France, they're probably not going for the win, probably just going for a top 15 finishes and some stage wins, and then the Vuelta they might be having a serious crack with Uran there maybe. Groupama, FTJ, no real ins or outs to speak of. They're still led by their two main men, Arnaud Demar and Thibaut Pinot. Arnaud Demar is going to the Tour de France this year. He's their leader on the flat stages. Surprisingly, they aren't taking Thibaut Pinot to the Tour de France. I think it's a good thing. There's too much pressure on him in France, and he's shown time and time again that he can't really live up to the hype. So I think he's going to the Giro, just going to focus on that. I think that's a smart play. He's usually better earlier on in the year, which is when the Giro is, so he could do some real damage there. David Gaudu will be their GC man in the Tour de France. Not sure how high he can finish, but I'm sure he'll be looking at a top 15, top 10 spot. But yeah, Arnaud Demar will be their main man in the Tour on the flat stages. Once again, probably not going to have that insane of a year. All their hopes really rely on Demar and Pinot as to how well their year goes. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go. My hair is an absolute mess for those watching on YouTube, but hopefully those on Spotify think I'm a good-looking man. Ineos Grenadiers, as always, have had some big ins, as they do, as their budget is outrageous. Richie Porte has come in from Trek Segafredo, where he's given up leadership on GC to be a super domestic. Just shows how much money they have, really, that they can lure someone in to do that. Adam Yates is also kind of making a similar switch from Mitchelton Scott. I don't think he's going to get too many chances on GC at Ineos, but he will be definitely there in the mountain stages, helping others out. And Daniel Felipe Martinez from EF Pro Cycling, he also might have a very similar gig. Chris Froome's obviously the big out to Israel Startup Nation, but we didn't really see too much of him last year, so not that big of a change from 2020 to 2021 in terms of anyone out, but some big ins. Flats, they don't really have, on the flat stages, they don't really have anyone of note to mention. Classics, they've got Kwiatkowski's probably their main man, and blokes like Adam Yates and Geraint Thomas could also have a crack at some of the Hillier Ardennes classics. But the GC, they've got a serious list here. Egan Bernal is going to the Giro and the Vuelta. Richard Carapaz is going to the Tour de France. Theo Gegenhardt is going to the Tour de France. Geraint Thomas is going to the Tour de France. Richie Porte is going to the Tour de France. So not really sure who the team leader will be there. Could legit just be anyone on their day that they could just see who has the legs. I don't think it will be Richie Porte. I don't think has signed to be a purely domestic rider. Not sure where the team stands on Geraint Thomas at the moment. He could be the leader, as could Richard Carapaz, and then Theo I can never say his name. Theo Gegenhardt, I think it is. He won the Giro, so that he could also be given Tour leadership there. In terms of the Giro, as I mentioned, they've got Bernal, and they've also got Sivakov and Martinez. So Bernal will probably lead that with the help of Sivakov and Martinez. And then at the Vuelta, they've got Bernal and Adam Yates. So Adam Yates will probably be super doming Egan Bernal. So absolutely stacked lineups for all three Grand Tours there. They could conceivably win all three. In a world that it doesn't have Jumbo-Visma in it, I could probably get behind that. But I think Jumbo-Visma will have something to say about that, at least one of them. Looking forward to another dominant year from Ineos Grenadiers. I believe they're a new team to the World Tour. I'm not 100%. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they are the only new team. Intermarché, Wanty Group, Gobert, Martira. I was going to say Wanty Group, Gobert. That's what they used to be called when they were a continental team in the Tour de France. I think they bought Triple C's license, and they retained not many people from that squad. They retained Jan Hurt, the Czech rider. They also brought in Louis Menkes from NTT Pro Cycling and Rain Tarame from Direct Energy. They didn't really have any big outs. Their leaders on the flat stages will be Danny Van Poppel. Not sure if he has what it takes to contend with the big boys at the Grand Tours, but maybe target some smaller stage races. He will be riding the Tour de France. In terms of GC, Jan Hurt is going to the Giro and the Vuelta. I'm not sure if he has what it takes to be a GC rider, but he will be definitely looking for a mountain stage win in the Giro. And then Louis Menkes is going to the Tour de France and the Vuelta, so Hurt might be super doming Menkes at the Vuelta, and Menkes might just be seeing how he goes at the Tour de France, maybe some stage wins. Not sure if he still has it in him to make a push for a jersey, but we'll see how he goes. Israel Startup Nation, obviously some huge in for this team this year. They've brought in Chris Froome from Ineos, Sepp Van Mark from EF Pro Cycling, Daryl Impey from Mitchelton Scott, Michael Woods from EF Pro Cycling, so some big names there. On the flat stages, this is probably their weakness as a side. They have a few sprinters, but no one really leaps off the page at you. Obviously, they've got the big name of Andre Greipel, but he showed last year he's not really the man that he once was. He'll be going to the Giro, as will David Chimole. I think he's how you say it, Chimole. He will also be going there. Maybe they'll just be leading both out, and they'll just see who's faster at the time. And then Hugo Hofstadter will be going to Vuelta after a pretty good Tour de France last year. In terms of GC, obviously Chris Froome will be their main man. He's going to the Tour de France. Their other guys, Dan Martin, he's going to the Giro where he might ride GC. I don't know why that was a tongue twister. And then he'll be helping out Chris Froome at the Tour de France. In terms of the one-day races, they've got Sepp Van Mark, who's very good at it. Dan Martin as well. He can take on the Hilliard Classics, as can Michael Woods, who will also be helping out Chris Froome at the Tour de France. Next up, we've got Lotto Soudal. Ins and outs, not really anyone of note. Their leaders never have anyone on GC. Lotto Soudal, I can't remember the last man they've had on GC, to be honest. On the flats, though, they've got Caleb Ewan, who will be actually going to all 3 Giros. I'm going off Pro Cycling Stats' start list at the moment. I think they're usually pretty accurate. I think they look at interviews and stuff and see where people are going. But at the moment, he's written down for the Giro, Tour de France and Vuelta, so that will be very impressive if he can get through all 3 of those in the space of 3 months, and it'll be interesting to see how he goes. It'll be, I keep saying interesting, but it just is. It'll be interesting to see if that takes away from his performance, or if he's able to keep up his high quality sprinting at all 3, because he could be seriously looking at a 15 wins across the 3 there. He's that good. And then in the classics, they've got Philippe Gilbert and John Degenkolb, who are both 2 of the best classics riders going around. They are getting to the end of their careers, but I think they still have what it takes, especially on the cobbles, to do some damage. But yeah, not too much to talk about with Lotto Soudal, obviously. Not going to have too much impact in the mountains at any race this year. Classics and sprint stages, though, they'll be all up in that business. Next up, we've got Movistar. Once again, as always, very big GC team, always looking for mountain stages. They've brought in Miguel Angel Lopez from Astana, which is probably one of the biggest signings of the season. They've also brought in Ivan Garcia Cortina, who is a young Spanish sprinter. He can also contend with the best at the classics, so he kind of gives them a new dimension. Obviously, Valverde can do it in the classics and pretty much any race you want, but he is approaching the end of his career and he's a bit less dynamic than he once was. So Valverde's going to the Vuelta, but Cortina will give them another dimension throughout the 2021 season. On GC, they've got Miguel Angel Lopez, obviously, he'll be going to the Tour de France and the Vuelta. Enrique Mas, he'll be going to the Tour de France and the Vuelta as well. And Marc Soler will be going to the Giro and the Vuelta. So it looks like Soler will be targeting the Giro. Lopez will probably go for the Tour de France with help from Enrique Mas, or they'll just go together. Like a bit of a... Oh, how have I forgotten? I don't know what I was trying to say. And then all 3 of them are going to the Vuelta, which is pretty interesting. That'll be interesting to see how they go with the Trident there. They've done in the past with Quintana and Valverde, but and others, but we'll see how they go at the Vuelta. It's probably the one place to do the Trident. I think you might have success there, especially in the Spanish mountains. So we'll see how they go there. I just need to search up the guy's name I keep forgetting of here before we move on to Bahrain Victorious. Mikel Landa is who I'm thinking of. Not sure what Mikel Landa is doing this year, actually. I assume he's still at... he's at Bahrain Victorious. Yes, I forgot he went to Bahrain Merida. Haven't seen too much of Mikel Landa. I don't know why, I just didn't wait for the next team. We were about to talk about it. But Jack Haig has come in to Bahrain Victorious from Mitchelton Scott. Mark Cavendish has left them and gone to Deceuninck Quickstep, but that's not too much of a loss. We hardly saw him last year for Bahrain. Jack Haig's a pretty good in. They're similar to Movistar, a big GC team, don't offer too much in any other of the categories. Michael Lander is by far their best GC man. He will be targeting the Giro and the Tour de France. In terms of who will be joining him at each event, Pello Bilbao, who had a pretty good Grand Tour last year, he will be going to the Giro. Damiano Caruso will also be going to the Giro, who's been top 10 in previous Grand Tours, so that's a pretty strong lineup. And then at the Tour de France, they've got Mikel Landa, Wout Poels, Pello Bilbao, and Jack Haig, so that's a pretty strong team there. It'll be interesting to see if Landa and Bilbao form a bit of a duo, or if everything is behind Landa this year. I hope it's behind Landa, because I think when teams divvy up their power across 2 or 3, it's never too successful unless your name is Team Sky. But we'll see how that goes. Sonny Colbrelli is probably their only other man worth mentioning in the classics or flat stages. He can be the best on his day. He'll also be going to the Tour de France, but not sure how much help he'll get given their GC hopes. Big year for Bahrain Victorious. They've always had pretty big investment, but haven't necessarily seen the success on the road that they would have wanted given the level of their backing. So big year for them. Team Bike Exchange obviously changed from Mitchelton Scott or Mitchelton Bike Exchange or whatever. I don't even know at this point. They change name every year. They've brought in Michael Matthews from Sunweb. He's come home to the Australian team. Adam Yates has left to Ineos. Daryl Impey has gone to Israel Startup Nation. Jack Haig, as just mentioned, went to Bahrain Victorious. Very two-pronged attack this year. They don't have too much depth. They've got a few youngsters like Lucas Hamilton and a few others, but Simon Yates will be going to the Giro, TDF, and the Tour de France. Not sure if he has what it takes to win a Tour de France, but we'll see. Definitely think he can win a Giro. I don't know if he actually has in the past. I feel like I'm making myself look pretty dumb here at cycling. I know quite a bit if I'm not going to be cocky, but my memory just does not serve me well. Michael Matthews is also going to the Tour de France. He's their main man in the sprint stages and also the one-day races. So Simon Yates can also win a one-day race if it's a bit hillier. So they're definitely the two guys. If we see a Bike Exchange win this year, it's probably going to be one of those two, or maybe someone else in a smaller race. But they're the big names for Bike Exchange. For DSM, I actually don't know what that stands for, but that is the former Sunweb team. They obviously brought in Roman Bardet from Agi Desert. Michael Matthews left, Vilko Kelderman left, and the big one, Mark Hershey, left. I was reading some previews to gather some data, and they didn't actually mention Hershey, and that's because that came after. So I actually didn't hear about that, so that was a big shock when I read about that this morning. He is an absolute wonder kid. They actually haven't announced who's going where yet, but their two GC men are Jay Hindley and Roman Bardet. Hindley had a great year last year. I think it was the Giro d'Italia where he had an absolutely insane finish. He might have come second or something, but he had a great one. And Roman Bardet, obviously, we know that his pedigree. We're not sure if this year he'll still be going for GC or if he's going to become a bit of a stage win man or maybe even target the one-day hillier races. But yeah, probably not too much success going to come DSM's way this year, but the way they're led, their tactics, I'm sure they'll surprise a few of us, like they did at the Tour de France last year. Jumbo-Visma, obviously, next to Ineos Grenadiers, probably, and Deceuninck Quickstep, probably the cream of the crop over the last few years. Just such a great roster. When we talk about leaders, basically could mention the whole roster. Ins and outs, not really anyone of note. Roglic is riding the Tour de France with Sepp Kuss and Steven Kruijswijk. They haven't announced what races Tom Dumoulin will be going to yet. George Bennett will be riding the Giro. I didn't actually recognise any of the other names in the Giro, so he could be going solely for GC there, but I'm not sure if he's at that level anymore, but we'll see. Hopefully George can do that. And then at the Vuelta, they've got Sepp Kuss and Steven Kruijswijk, so that might be a bit of a two-way attack to see out of those two who has the level of going for a tour race, a stage race, and then Wout van Aert is going to the Tour de France as well, but I'm sure we'll see him in pretty much every race this year, as he is an absolute freak, and he'll probably be winning pretty much all of them as well. Next up, we've got Quebecer ASOS. Has to be said, this team hasn't had too much success, but They've brought in Fabio Aru, big name from UAE Team Emirates, and Sergio Henao from that same team. They've let go Edvald Bosenhagen to Total Direct Energy, Roman Kreuziger to Gazprom Rus Velo, and Louis Menkes to Intermarché Wanty Gobert. Their leaders on the flat will be Giacomo Nizzolo. He'll be going to the Giro and the Tour de France. He's probably their best hope of winning races. They have a few guys on GC, but not sure how they'll be going. Domenico Pozzovivo will be going to the Giro, but we haven't seen too much success from him in the last 2 years. But, if he can go back to his 2017, 2018 form, who knows? They could have a surprise result there. And then Fabio Aru hasn't been announced where he's going. Obviously had a bit of a shocking time at UAE Team Emirates after he left Astana, but he's a very talented rider, so we'll see how he fares this year. Trek Segafredo lost Richie Porte to Ineos. Their leaders will be Nibali, as always. He'll be going to the Giro and the Tour de France this year. I don't know too much about this guy, I have to be honest. I think his name is Giulio Ciccone. He'll be going to the Vuelta by himself. No other GC favourites there, so he could be a contender there. And Bauke Mollema will probably be helping out Nibali, but he might also have a dip at the Giro and the Tour de France as well. The other big names in the Trek Segafredo side, former world champ Mads Pedersen. He's going to the Tour de France, where he did such a great job last year of protecting Richie Porte. So we'll see how he goes this year, especially in the classics and the one-day races. He'll be looking to get some big wins this year. And that actually brings us to our final team. I can't believe how fast I've got through this. Probably haven't analysed the teams enough. I've kind of just been rattling off the changes. But I'm very excited for the season. I can't lie. This episode hopefully will spur me on to watching the first few months of it. And then they'll carry me into the Giro. And then once we're into the Giro, I'm hooked. But UAE Team Emirates, few big ins. Rafael Majka from Bora Hansgrohe, Matteo Trentin from Triple C, and the big one, Mark Hirschi from Sunweb. That is such a big signing. They've lost Sergio Henao and Fabio Aru to Quebecer, but looking at the leaders of the UAE team, I think this is a big year for them. They've had some poor performances in recent seasons despite the strong financial backing. If you look at the other guys who have a similar budget to UAE, they're getting a lot more bang for their buck. So on the flat stages, they've got Alexander Kristoff and Fernando Gaviria. Gaviria obviously had a very interrupted year last year. I think he had COVID twice. So hopefully he can come back with a vengeance this year. Kristoff as well, he is aging, but he's still very good on his day. At the classics, they've got Kristoff and Trentin to do the damage. But now they've got probably the most exciting talent in cycling ever, in Tadej Pogacar, winning the Tour de France at his first crack at 22 years old. He will be their GC man, probably also their classics man, could arguably their sprint man as well. He's that talented. So Mark Hirschi joining him, that's pretty dangerous. They haven't announced what races any of their guys will be racing in yet, but I'm sure Pogacar will be defending his yellow jersey at the Tour de France in June. Mark Hirschi, it'll be interesting to see what role he takes up. He's one of these riders who, similar to Wout van Aert, where I'm just not sure where their career is going to lead them at, whether they're good enough to go for GC or they're just going to be a dangerous one-day racer. Kind of like Alaphilippe, not sure where his career will take him. Mark Hirschi, he's good enough to do whatever he wants, though. He's good enough to challenge anyone on their day on a one-day race. I think he's good enough to challenge a GC race. Not sure if he could do a stage race that goes for 3 weeks, but definitely a 1 week one. I think he is good enough to. So it's going to be a big year for him. Interesting to see how he develops along with Tadej Pogacar. So yeah, big year for UAE Team Emirates. I think they've changed their tactic a little bit of not worrying too much about big names and kind of going for just good talent and youngsters. And then Rafael Majka, he probably won't be going for GC, but he'll probably be helping out Pogacar. He might go for GC at the Vuelta or the Giro, but not sure yet. So that's the end of my wrap. I actually thought this was going to be like an hour-long episode, to be honest, but when you're by yourself, you kind of just race through it. But very excited for the year. Starting off at UAE. In the UAE, very I'm just really looking forward to the year. I'm hoping I'll be a bit more hooked into it this year. I really want to stay tuned for the spring classics and stuff, because that's a time of the year for cycling that's pretty hectic. There's a big race on every weekend, and I usually don't pay attention, and then I get into it for the Grand Tours. But this year I really want to be onto it. Hopefully this podcast can actually keep me into a few sports if I lock in a monthly episode, which means I have to keep on it and keep track. I've been doing a few votes and stuff for some sports, which tries to keep me into it as well. I'm doing that for tennis. So hopefully this year I stay a bit more onto all of my sports. In the winter I sometimes just drop everything and go back to my rugby league that I love so much, but I'm going to try and keep up as many sports as I can this year. I do usually care about quite a fair few, but I just love sport too much, don't I? I'm a bit of a nuffy. But yeah, very looking forward to the UCI World Tour this year. Good luck to all the teams. If you're going to ask for any predictions from me, in terms of a team, look, it's hard to go past Jumbo-Visma, Ineos Grenadiers and Deceuninck Quickstep being the top three. I think UAE Team Emirates could surprise some people with Gaviria coming back this year and bringing in Trenton, Hershey, Micah. I think they could be a top 5 contender in the team standings. Other good teams we're looking at, it's tough. I'm just scrolling through now quickly. Bahrain Victorious, big year for them. I think they could produce some big results in the stage races. I think finally, similar to UAE, they've realised they don't really need 5 big names. They just need good riders, which I think will help them out in the long run. Movistar, look, it's easy to buy into them every year, but I'm hoping this year they have some success with Mas, Lopez and Soler. Israel Startup Nation, they're probably the wild card this year. They could come last in the World Tour. They could come top 5. They could win a Tour de France with Chris Froome. They could have no one in the top 20. So very excited to see how they go. Fairly new team to cycling and kind of bringing some excitement into it by adding a new team to the mix. And I'm interested to see how teams like Bora Hansgrohe go, who may not necessarily on paper have an absolute standout GC candidate, they do have Peter Sagan, so I can't really talk crap about them, and Pascal Ackermann, but very smart teams who've built their roster very well, very smart tactically, so excited to see how teams like that go. I don't know if I should make a prediction for the races. I think I should wait and see the form lines a bit. We haven't really seen many of these guys race yet in 2021, so I think I'm going to hold my predictions back. I'll try and do a preview episode before the big classics and before the big Grand Tours as well, and then a review episode as well, hopefully. But yeah, good luck to all riders this year. Not that anyone is listening, and yeah, stay tuned for more content. Follow us on all the social media. I appreciate you for listening and watching, and check back soon for more episodes. Thanks.